If this is what a ceasefire looks like, then I'm St. Peter. The very next day after Trump's so-called diplomatic victory, the fighting starts again. The Persian Gulf has turned into a fire no one can put out, especially not with Netanyahu constantly adding fuel to it, pushing for escalation. Let's start with the story that dominated the war. Trump announcement a 2-week ceasefire with Iran exactly 1 hour before his own ultimatum expired, threatening to wipe out an entire civilization. Markets celebrate, oil dropping 16% in a single day, the biggest fall since the COVID crash in 2022. Headlines everywhere: Trump saved the world, Iran back down, and then nothing. No ceasefire and definitely no end of the war. Let's take a closer look at the terms of this ceasefire. The one announced just an hour before the final ultimatum expired. The Strait of Hormuz is now fully under Iranian control. Before the war, around 140 ships passed through it daily. On Wednesday, April 8th, just 11. That's a 92% drop. Iran agreed to allow only 12 vessels per day. And here's the key part: Iran is now charging a fee, $1 for every barrel of oil on board for passage through Hormuz, paid in Bitcoin. Think about it. A country under sanctions, cut off from SWIFT, cut off from the dollar, has just imposed a toll of the most important oil route in the world, and it's collecting payment in crypto, making it impossible to block or seize. A tanker carrying 2 million barrels, that's $2 million per trip in Bitcoin. Now let's look at what the United States actually achieved in these negotiations. The regime hasn't changed. There is not a word about dismantling Iran's military or missile capabilities. And on the nuclear issue, declarations about not pursuing nuclear weapons. Iran had already agreed to that before the war. This is a complete circus. Did we even have a ceasefire at all? Just hours after it announced Israel launched the largest attack on Lebanon in the entire conflict. 50 fire jets, 160 bombs. Central Beirut was targeted without any warning to civilians. Hundreds of civilians were killed under the rubble. Thousands more were injured and maimed. Pakistan, which mediated the negotiations, says Lebanon was included in the ceasefire, that both sides agreed it would no longer be targeted. France, Germany, the United Kingdom, essentially the entire EU confirmed the same. But Netanyahu says, nope, Lebanon is a separate matter. And Trump backs him. And that's not the end. 8 hours after the ceasefire, someone strike Iran Lawan and Syria Island oil export terminal. No one claims responsibility. Not Tel Aviv, not Washington. Iran responds immediately. 103 drones and 41 missiles launched at the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Over 140 strikes on US allies, just hours after the ceasefire. And now the real cherry on the top, even inside the White House, that they can't agree on what was actually negotiated. Trump posts on Truth Social that Iran's 10-point plan is the basis for further talks. 24 hours later, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt tells reporters the same plan is fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and completely rejected. How it is possible that the President of the United States says the one thing and 24 hours later his own spokesperson says the exact opposite? And here's what really worth paying attention to. The US federal government plans to introduce automatic draft registration starting from December 2026. Right now, most American men aged 16 to 25 are required to register individually in case of war. But from December onward, registrations will be automatic. The White House says it just wants to keep all options open. But to me, this looks like preparation for Plan B. A ground invasion of Iran. Donald Trump gives his allies 2 days. 2 days to present a concrete plan to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Otherwise, the United States will leave NATO. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte flies to Washington on short notice. He meets Trump at the White House. The meeting lasts 2 hours. And what does Trump do? Just moments after it ends, he posts on Truth Social, NATO wasn't here when we needed them, and it won't be if we need them again. Remember Greenland, that big badly managed chunk of ice? The White House press secretary adds, they were tested and they failed. Spain blocks the airspace of 4 US aircraft. Prime Minister Sanchez called the war with Iran deeply illegal and deeply unjust. 15 US refueling planes are forced to relocate from Spain to France and Germany. Marco Rubio says it directly, if you won't let us use your bases, then what are we doing in NATO? The good news, the US is not leaving NATO. In 2023, Congress passed the law that prevents a president from unilaterally withdrawing from the alliance. Such a move requires a 2/3 Senate majority or an act of Congress. Trump simply doesn't have the votes. The bad news, the US doesn't have to leave NATO to make its presence meaningless. All it takes is moving troops, limiting cooperation and undermining Article 5. And NATO becomes an alliance on paper only. And while Europe scrambles to respond, the Gulf monarchies are facing a crisis on their own. It looks like the fabulously wealthy royal families of the Persian Gulf are in an even more difficult position than it may seem. Some of these regimes may not survive this, and lot indicates that the current confrontation between Iran and the United States could push these states to the edge. This is Iran divide and rule strategy at a master level. Don't forget, Qatar gifted Trump a private Boeing 747 worth $400 million. Saudi Arabia, through the PIF fund, poured $2 billion into Kushner's company. They also financed the Kushner's Fifth Avenue real estate project with $1.2 billion. And what did they get in return? A war on their doorstep and the bombing at their critical infrastructure, which may take years to rebuild if it ever gets rebuilt at all. Dubai has its main airport and seaport effectively blocked. Trump adopted Netanyahu's vision of attacking Iran and betrayed the very people who financed him. So as you can see, Iran is holding all the cards here. That's why it's acting with such confidence, despite the bombs falling and despite losing more and more commanders. Now, shifting on the second topic, Europe and the return of safe. German defense giant Rheinmetall has just given Romania a brutal lesson in how Europe's armament system really works. Romania ordered 298 Lynx infantry fighting vehicles under safe. The contract was worth 3 billion euros. And what happens at the final stage? Right before the deadline, Rheinmetall rises the price by 30%. Suddenly, 3 billions turn into 4. Nearly 1 billion euros more than originally agreed. And here's the key part. Those vehicles won't even be produced in Romania. They will be built in Hungary at the Rheinmetall factory. So Romania takes out an EU bucket loan, pays Germany a price inflated by 30% and doesn't even get the jobs. That said, you have to give Romanians some credit. They still have some backbone. Their defense minister, Radu Miruta, says it clearly. We will not pay artificial prices just because someone sends money from the SAFE program. When we started negotiations, suppliers come with one price. Now, when we are close to signing, they come back with a price 30% higher. We will not accept this. And here's the key point. Rheinmetall is not the only one doing this. Private ammunition producers are doing the same. They've also raised prices by 30%. Why? Because SAFE allows contracts without competition. No tenders, no bidding processes to find the biggest offer, the best offer. Under SAFE, direct contracts are possible, and that means the supplier knows there is no one to compete with. And when the buyer, in this case a government, had the deadline to commit those funds by May 31st, 2026, it's simple. Either you sign on our terms or you lose the EU money. Look, I'm not expecting Germany to sell at cost. Fine, make your profit. Make the same margins you make on every other contract. But if you come in at the last moment and add another 30% on top of your already massive margin, what are we talking about here? 50%? The mechanism is simple. The European Union requires 65 or 70% of components come from member states. And who actually qualifies under those rules? Germany and France. Now, moving to the final topic. France is officially preparing for a major war. And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is the official position of the French government, backed by billions in spendings. Should we be concerned? Is there anything we are not being told? On March 26, French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu stood before Parliament and announced an additional 8.5 billion euros for missiles, drones and ammunition by 2030, on top of the 16 billion already planned. That brings total spending on ammunition alone to 24.5 billion euros, more than 4 times the previous plan. And the numbers speak for themselves. Stockpiles of kamikaze drones and cruise missiles up 400%. AASM hammer-guided bombs up 240%. Air defense missiles like Aster and Mika up 30%. Earlier in January, Macron announced an addition of 36 billion euros in defense spendings over 5 years. To remain free, you must inspire fear, and to inspire fear, you must be strong. France's defense budget is set to reach 63 billion euros by 2027. Double what it was in 2017. In March, France also announced it will increase the number of nuclear warheads for the first time since 1992. Now let's look at France's neighbor, Germany, because here something far less visible but just as concerning has been introduced. On December 5, 2025, a new military modernization law was passed and it came into force on January 1st, 2026. Under this law, every German man between the ages of 17 and 45 must obtain official permission from the Bundeswehr if he wants to leave the country for more than 3 months. Every man. Not just reservists, not just soldiers. Everyone. You want to study abroad? You need approval. Work abroad? Approval. Extended travel? Approval. And here's the key point. Until now, this kind of restrictions applies only in times of emergency of war, in the event of an invasion. Now, it applies in peacetime every day. A spokesperson for the German Ministry of Defense said it directly. In an emergency, we need to know who may be staying abroad for extended periods. The Bundeswehr currently has around 184,000 soldiers. The target for 2035 is from 255 to 280,000 plus 200,000 reservists. That's close to 500,000 people. The legal framework is already in place. And there's something interesting. One of the first people to comment on these new rules was El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, who wrote, "Oh, but remember, they live in a full democracy and we live in the dictatorships." Then added sarcastically, "I'm sure those who rank freedom and democracy around the world will update their rankings immediately." And it's sharp point. Even El Salvador imposed emergency measures to fight gangs. It's called a dictatorship. When Germany restricts men from leaving the country without military approval in peacetime, It's called modern democracy. There is something deeply concerning here. The two largest powers in the European Union, France and Germany, are both ramping up for a wartime footing. France openly talks about the readiness for a high-intensity conflict within 3 or 4 years. Germany is quietly building a legal framework for mobilization. At the NATO summit in The Hague, the defense spending target was raised to 5% of GDP by 2035. Chancellor Merz says Germany will have the strongest conventional army in Europe. France is expanding its nuclear arsenal. So hit subscribe because something tells me we will have a lot more to talk about very soon.